Morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yay. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Carrie. How are y'all doing today? I feel like it's been a while since I've been with y'all. It is cold, isn't it? My goodness. Thanks, Texas. You know how to be extreme. Okay, so while we're waiting, tell me what you're doing to protect your plants. I've got some inside. We seed tomatoes like way too early, and then my husband gets frustrated when we're having to carry him in and out and all this stuff. And I'm like, if we just waited a little bit, it'd probably be okay. But he gets all gung ho about it. He's the funny one. I may be the horticulturist, but it, he's all about it. Some inside, some covered, nothing. Yeah, yeah. I do all of that too, actually. We have raised beds in our vegetable garden, and we bought this little, I don't know, it's like a little greenhouse cover thing out of PVC and this cool little plastic cover. And we were going to try to put that over some Brussels sprouts because they're doing pretty good, but we didn't get out there to that. That's kind of how I garden. Is when I get to it, it works. If I don't, then it just is what it is. I wish I had a more steady schedule to be diligent and do exactly what I want to do with it, but I don't know. I wouldn't give up the all of the fun activities I'm doing with my kids either right now. So it's trade off. So we just finished the Junior Master Gardener Conference. That's why my background is like this. It was absolutely awesome. If you didn't attend this year, which you very well may not have because you already have a lot on your plate, but definitely if you're interested in working with kids, even from a distance, that conference is the Junior Master Gardener National Leader Training is phenomenal. I mean, I learned so much, and I don't work with kids in gardening all that much. My own kids. Let's see here. Michael said, spend money on electricity and gas in a greenhouse. You know, we have talked about a greenhouse for years and I still don't have one. I, my husband needs to get after it. I tell you what, he is so busy. I can't complain. Hi. So, do you have a greenhouse, Michael? Anybody else have a greenhouse? I would be so jealous. Built your own. I may need your plans then. Y'all are welcome to unmute during this time. We can just visit because y'all, I mean, you're going to listen to me just like drone on here, but y'all can unmute. Yay! So, Michael, you made your own.
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. What size is it?
Well, I started out last year was a small, little 6 by 8, and realized right off the bat that was too small. I don't have a lot of property. My backyard's only about 3,000 square feet. So this year I said, well, I've got to have more room. So I added a 10 by 10 onto the side of it. So I've got about 180 square feet or so.
Cool. Very cool. So, what all you growing in it?
Oh, I've got all kinds of plants that I wintered over. I have about 40 coleus cuttings in here, and I've got some cabbage growing and onions, and I've started seeds right now. I've got, again, started too early, but I probably got 100 tomato plants started and a bunch of basil, and trying to get my peppers to start. Having issues with those.
Yeah, we do wait on our peppers because they don't handle the cold at all. Like we can push it with the tomatoes, And something that I learned back during the snowpocalypse, a couple of years ago, like we had our onions in the ground already. We plant onions like anywhere from October to January as soon as we can find sets because I don't grow them from seed. We will go ahead and put them in the garden. There's like long day onions, short day onions, stuff like that. And so um, there's different seasons for them. But we have a good friend that grows for production, and he was laughing at me because we protected our onions, and he's like, Jayla, you don't have to protect onions like that. They can handle down into the teens. And I'm going, are you kidding me? I did all this work. And we actually let me tell you what I did, which was a mistake. Do as I do, or do as I say, not as I do. So we had cattle at the time, and we put out big round bales of hay, and where they would, stand and eat hay and poop, there would be, they would eat it down, and then we'd move locations. Well, we used that because we knew the poop would increase the heat and stuff like that. So we put that on our beds, and it worked wonderfully for an insulation. But let me tell you about the weeds that we had in those beds after that. So yeah, I don't know that I would recommend doing that. If you could compost it fully before you did, maybe so, but it was not. So you can learn a lot from my mistakes. Just saying. Let's see here. I'm still waiting on Dean, and we're good 10 minutes out. Our speakers, they have this Zoom stuff down so well. They'll show up sometimes right, it's time to go, and they know exactly what to do. So I am not concerned yet. Yesterday, though, in that conference, you get a little edgy when, some of these speakers we don't know super well, and so we don't know what their abilities are. We always give them an opportunity to test their equipment and stuff like that if they're not used to Zoom. But yeah, our AgriLife people, we know they've got it down. And if y'all see Dean in the participant, I'm watching, but if you see him, just holler at me and tell me, let our speaker in. There he is, right there. Ha ha. You talk about him and he shows up. Let's see here. Dean, can you hear us?
I can. Can
Yeah,
you hear? Okay, good.
we sure can.
I'm
Just talk.
already losing my voice.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said I'm already losing my voice.
Oh no. Hey,
No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Let me see.
well, take breaks.
There is video. Now, okay. Is my audio okay? Because sometimes I get complaints that it breaks up,
It's
but
kind of breaking up a little bit.
at the beginning, okay. All right. Let me see if I can switch to something else here.
And while Dina's working on that, I see some of you putting in how many are in the room. If you would continue to do that, and if you're just on your own, just let us know what county you're training with. We do like to keep a record. I can see the number of participants, but especially if you're training all together, that's only one participant, and I know you've got a whole room. So if you wouldn't mind adding adding to the chat, that would be most helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Let me see here. All right, I am going to hide this for a second and figure this.
Okay. Do what you need to do. I'm just chit-chatting here.
Well, that was good. Chit-chatting is good.
Chit-chatting's good. So yeah, we've been looking into a little bit of research about, Zoom is excellent. And I tell you what, we just had to flip a conference from in person to online for several reasons, actually. And Zoom is such an excellent way to deliver content. without having to travel, without, I mean, there's a lot of extra costs involved with travel and things like that. For those of you that are all together in a class, I mean, it's easier to get to a local situation than having a speaker come in, all of those things. But we definitely miss, the face to face, the being able to a little bit easier ask questions. Of course, you still can with chat and the mics and stuff like that. But where the research is showing that just having this time, this informal talk time, it helps make it a little more real. And so again, that's why I encourage y'all to go ahead and unmute during this time if you want. When we do have our speaker talk, we do ask that videos are off and mics are muted. That way we're not interrupting. But I would love to hear from y'all if you have questions, if you want to ask, hey, what do I do for this in my garden? Or hey, I just learned this really cool thing. I want to share it. Please feel free to do that. We'd love to hear from you all. So one of the new plants that my mom is actually trying to grow is ashwagandha. Does anybody have any experience with ashwagandha? That's something that's been exciting to me here lately. Anybody? It's a little different kind of a plant.
One of our folks here in Angelina County started from seeds,
Yeah.
but never got them to maturity, and they died. They didn't make it to maturity because she killed them. Okay, all right. So
you sound like me. Well, cool. I'm so glad that somebody else at least is, trying. We'll get it down. We will figure it out. Seems like maybe I trained in Bell County, and it seems like some people had grown it there. What about moringa? Anybody tried that? These are some unusual types of plants. They're not our normal. Michael talked about basil, which, oh my goodness, basil is probably my most favorite herb to grow. I love herbs, by the way. Love, love, love them. And basil is probably my tops. They're fairly easy to grow, but the cardinal basil, if you haven't grown that, oh, it's such a beautiful plant. On top of being useful, we of course, cook with it, but I've started using it in teas and things like that. I absolutely love the flavor. And I'm not a huge licorice fan, and some of those varieties can be more on the licorice side of things, but I love them in a tea. That doesn't bother me at all. Y'all are learning all sorts of stuff about me randomly today. I guess I'm tired. That JMG conference was so exciting, but we were online for a day and a half solid, and so I'm kind of tired. But so let me just put another plug in there that the International Master Gardener Conference is coming up in August. We really want you to be a part of that. That one's going to be phenomenal. It's 4 days long, and so I'm already like trying to get worked up for 4 full days of this sort of stuff, being engaged and talking to a screen. Sometimes I'm kind of lonely out here since I can't see anybody else right now. But yeah, y'all jump in there. Jump on in there.
All right. So for the audio, we're just gonna have to wait. So
okay, we're gonna do the best we can.
So I cannot seem to get my little headphones that I usually have at work to connect. So I'm at home today. So since I don't really have a space to do a long program at the Dallas Center, we're all open concept. So it's quite annoying to hear somebody just like go on and on and on for hours. So yeah, so I try to do this stuff at home. So a little bit easier to do it at home. Okay, so now we need to figure out how to share my screen so I can get my presentation up.
Well, Dean, you sound fine right now, but we always have your recordings if we need those. People can go back and listen to that if something cuts out. You can definitely grab that as well.
Yeah, I think it just breaks up sometimes at the beginning, maybe, and then it kind of the audio settles in. Who knows? I don't know.
You sound better now to me.
Well, that's good. Okay, well, good. All right, now let's see. Now let me get to my presentation here. Pull this thing up. I had to make some quick updates this morning.
Uh-huh. That's how it goes for me at least.
Always the way it goes. Okay, well, let's go to this mode here.
Well, I tell you what, I will tell you a little bit about our speaker while he is getting set up. So we are so excited to have Dean Minchillo with us. He's with the Texas Water Resources Institute in the Dallas area. He has been in this role for several years, but has worked with water and water districts and that sort of stuff for most of his career. And he is such an excellent asset. Water is such a precious commodity and resource that we have to protect it. And as gardeners, it's so important to what we do. Therefore, we need to be very well versed in how to protect this resource. And so Dean's going to talk with us about water and about watering our spaces and things like that. So Dean, whenever you're ready, we can get going, but just make yourself comfortable. Were you able to find the share button?
Yeah, am I not sharing right now?
I don't see your screen.
Okay. All right. Well, then that's a problem. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Let me let's do this. Let's do this. No, okay. Oh, here is share. Now, are we sharing?
Yes, yes.
And are we in? Ah,
There we go.
there it is. Okay. All right.
That looks
Perfect.
great. Okay, well, the
Okay.
floor is all yours. Take breaks whenever you need to. And as always, I'm working in the background and I'll monitor chat kind of as we go if y'all need anything. Have a wonderful class and we'll see you in a little bit.
Right. Thank you so much for really just for having me, I guess, for starters. And I know I have talked to Master Gardener intern classes a lot over the years, and I've got a lot more local presentations to do already this spring. So I know you guys are heavy into it. A little bit about me and about how this presentation is set up before we get started is like Jayla said, I've been in the water conservation arena for many, many years. 2000 actually, when I started with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, actually writing water permits. So kind of started my whole downward slide through the water conservation arena. And what's amazing about it today is an actually a career choice. So water conservation is just one of those things that when somebody walked into the utility manager's office or something, they got handed the water conservation hat. It was just something that utilities really had to do just because of rules and regulations, and there really was not a whole lot of impetus behind it. But now it's a it's an emerging career path. There are more water conservation professionals, especially in the state of Texas, than I've ever seen before, and and those of you who don't really know or may be new to Texas, and we'll talk a little bit about the water situation here during this presentation, but Texas is really one of really probably the most advanced state when it comes to water resources for the future. The planning for water resources is absolutely hands down one of the best in this state, and the commitment to it is incredible. So talk a little bit about that, and I think you guys are really really lucky to be in this position. So. All right, so here's how the presentation is going to go. I'm going to break it up into three big chunks. We'll have a couple of nice breaks built in, here. So we break it up, and let's see if I just do this, then it will tell us exactly what our program out is. Look at that. So we're going to talk about water conservation, and we'll talk about water supplies, and we'll just really kind of just the whole general importance of water conservation. Why is it important here? What do we need to do? And we'll morph that into landscape water use, right? Where is the water going? How is it being used? And then we'll get into the efficiency part of it. How can we help people be more efficient with their water use, right? So, ages ago, probably back in, I'm going to say 20, 2008, 2009, I actually went through the Master Gardener program in Travis County, which is Austin. And I believe we had about 35, maybe 40 people in that class. There were three of us in that class that were really interested in the landscape water aspect of Master Gardeners. We were interested in helping people be more efficient with their landscapes. Everybody else in the class was really interested in more traditional gardening, roses, that type of stuff. But now when I go to a lot of intern Master Gardener programs, especially intern programs, especially in urban areas, right? I'm seeing a lot more interest in landscape water use, right? So we're kind of moving away from, or we're making attempts to move away from just our traditional full grass landscape with our traditional evergreen boxwood type of shrubs, right? We're trying to diversify that a little bit. And during this presentation, I will bend turf grass, right? I think there is a great for turf grass. Do we use it inappropriately? Absolutely. Do we manage it inappropriately? Absolutely. Does it have a place in our ecosystem? And does it provide ecosystem services that are important? Absolutely, it does. It is very important. But we can do better, right? We can do better. So that will be a big part of this presentation, and how we use water is that. And like I said, I have breaks built in, and please, use the chat, ask some questions, put your hand up, whatever. Let's try to keep this as, interactive as we can online, right? Like, doing this is purpose, but it's tricky to get everybody together in the same room. So yeah, let's get started. Let's jump right in. Oh, and then by the way, full disclosure, I am at home. I do have dogs here, so you may hear some loud outbursts and eruptions of the dogs. If something happens, somebody happens to maybe just walk by with another dog, they always get upset that they're not the ones out walking. So okay, all right. So let's get into it. So why do we need to conserve water? So this little picture here is pretty much just what we see, right? I mean, we see a lot of giant master plan communities. And where I'm at in the Dallas area, right, we have some of the fastest in Texas up in this area, and they are growing by leaps and bounds and growing with master plan communities. And some of these communities they're not small, right? They're not, we're talking 2,000, 3,000 homes sometimes, which is incredible. One day you go by and there's cattle grazing on a field, and then the next day there's roads being cut in, and the community is being built just that fast. But all of these master plan communities have one thing in common, and that is turf grass and landscaping, right? And the conversion to more hardscape. So from a standpoint of environmental protection, right, we are really changing the surface of the earth, right? So, or of that area. We are taking away native soil, native grasses, native plants, and we're adding in hardscape, right? So we're adding in roads, driveways, sidewalks, rooftops, right? So we're also increasing the amount of flood flows that come off of that property. We're removing infiltration and we're creating some other issues. And then we're also creating a little bit more of a heat island effect, right? So we're getting more heating in those areas. So we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But for right now, right, let's look at where we are as far as the drought outlook goes in the United States, right? Which is not that right? So brown is bad in this thing. Brown means that drought is anticipated to persist. So if we look at the West, very, very dry, although much improvement in California. They had all the wildfires and then they had the rains. And then, of course, when you are dry for so long and then you get tons of rain, then you got to worry about mudslides. So they kind of just seem to go into one problem to the next. And we're not a whole lot different, although our switches from one problem to the next are a little bit different than what California has. But you can see we do have a pretty good amount of persistent drought, which is anticipated throughout the state of Texas. Now, our largest urban regions in the state look to be pretty clear from drought. But if we look at the actual conditions, currently right now, uh, 67% of the United States is under some form of drought, right? So you can see the drought scale there on the right, from no drought to just abnormally dry, all the way to absolute extreme or exceptional drought conditions. And you can see we're experiencing some of those exceptional and extreme conditions in the Texas Hill Country area, really from like San Antonio on south down to the Rio Grande River. And that has been persistent for a number of years now. So they are really in the grips of a terrible drought. For those of y'all that are in that area, you don't need me to tell you how bad it is, but it's bad and it doesn't seem to be getting any better for you guys. Hopefully that corner comes up pretty quickly, and you guys can reverse that trend. And then, of course, in Deep West Texas, pretty exceptional drought conditions. Now, if we just go zoom into the state proper, you can see a little bit better of the drought conditions, right? So we're looking at 77% of state is under some type of drought, but 23% of the state, right, which is a lot of area when you think about how large the state of Texas is either in extreme or exceptional drought conditions, right? So, and I do believe the Hill Country area has improved, right? I believe there was more of that was in an exceptional drought area not too long ago, and I believe we have seen a little bit of improvement, but still, it is not a good situation, and hopefully, the weather turns and you guys start getting some rain and can get out of that. When we look at the outlooks, right from NOAA. This is like a 3-month outlook that they put together. We're just going to look at March, April, May. February is pretty much over, right? We only have just about 8 days left in the month, so we can just forget about February already. Even though it's the shortest month, sometimes it seems to be the longest month of the year, just because of the weird weather and stuff that we get. But if you look at this, they're really calling for above average temperatures, right? So I don't know if that's news to anybody. I mean, that's kind of seems to be a continual trend. Now, of course, we would like to see or even equal chances would be nice. When you get into equal chances, that just really means there's not enough positive data to show trend, either positive or negative trend. So you kind of just get the equal chances part of it. And then the precipitation aspect of that, we're really looking at below average, right? But this has improved. This has improved from the last uh, set of these outlooks that was produced, and for most of the state. So we're not in the dark brown now. We're kind of more in the medium brown and the tan area, which is an improvement over where we were. So we'll take any improvement we can get. Right, going into the irrigating season, we certainly want to have the best chances that we can um, for our to have I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here because my slides have flipped are a little bit backwards, but we want to just make sure that we've got as much water as we can put up in our reservoirs going into our big irrigating season, which really kind of starts in March, right? And of course, people here have been worrying all long ride. Actually, neighbor around the corner of me that has a pretty good sloping driveway sprinkler on the other day and created a pretty good ice skating rink on their driveway and sidewalks. So I don't know how they got out, but that's their problem. Mine. So if we look at Texas from a weather standpoint, right, and especially droughts and floods, right? So that is sort of the commonality, the common theme is that Texas is in a continuous state of drought, broken by periods of rainfall, and to some extent that's true. And if we look at this everything in the red is drought, right, and everything in the blue is basically a flood. So you can see that pretty much every drought event is broken by a flood event, or every flood event turns into a drought event. It's kind of just this back and forth, and you can see some of like the bigger events on here, right? The darker the red, the bigger the event, or darker the blue, the deeper the blue, the bigger the event over time. So this is from 1895 all the way till about 2023, right? This is a tremendous amount of weather data, and some ones to really point out. Key ones to really look at would be the drought of record, which was in the 50s, right? So this was really considered a 7-year drought from 1950 to 1957. Um, it was and is still really considered the of record um, for the state of Texas. It was economically disastrous because of the length of time and the amount of days of no rainfall. It was quite impactful. But then when we get to 2011, you can see that deep red dark spike right there. That really became our most impactful single year drought on record. So you look at all of the individual years um, from the drought of record in the 50s, not one single one of those years was impactful as what we had in 2011. There was a tremendous amount of losses to the agriculture industry during that drought. It was impactful. But what's important and why I bring this up is because 1950s drought of record really implemented a lot of our state water planning. And I said at the beginning that the state of Texas is probably one of the most forward advanced states when it comes to water planning. And in the 1950s, after that drought, the Texas Water Development Board agency was created and charged for agency to water supplies. right? That is their whole charge. That is still their whole charge, is to continue to develop water supplies, be that reservoirs, water conservation, all any number of various activities to increase water supply. Um, and then after that flood till current day, there has been about 49 new reservoirs built in the state of Texas after the 50s. So there was a big push to really increase our water supplies. And then 2011 also had a giant leap in and water prevention and contingency measures, right? How do we improve those documents, those plans to make it better and to really be able to detect how supplies during those troubling times. So I just kind of set that up a little bit and make sure we really have a good feel, a good idea of what brand is state of Texas. That's pretty much what you're in for. You can certainly anticipate some dry times and some very wet times. The only thing really consistent about Texas weather is it's inconsistent. So you will learn that very quickly, especially anybody who is to this state and tries gardening. It is quite a learning curve. So I wish you all the very best of luck. But you will find your space. So, speaking of the Water Development Board, which I talked about earlier, they have a site called Water Data for Texas. And this is anybody who is interested in water supplies in the state of Texas will love this website, because that is all it is. It is everything to do with water and water development in the state. This what we're looking at here are the reservoirs of the state of Texas, and this is updated every day. And it will give statistics and data and information on every reservoir in the state of Texas. Where is it? Where is it at? Where is it trending? Right. So you can see right now for the state in general, we are at almost right. So that is pretty good. That's a pretty good position. Would 90%? Yes, because when we look at the statistics chart here on the left, right, you can see the navy blue line with the triangles, or at least this navy blue. Hopefully, y'all screens can show that it's black, but it's the line with the diamonds in it. And you can see that we are trending right along with 2023 and 2024, right? So where we get into trouble is when we see this 2011 line. So we talk about the 1950s being the drought of record. 2011 is now the benchmark that we look at. This is kind of the where we don't want to be. We don't want to see this type of trend happening. And you can see how high we were in 2011, as we were, over it or right around 80% going to the summer season, and then you can see it just began to decline and really tanked in the summer during that year. So that's what we want to do. We just want to kind of keep an eye on these trends and make sure that we're trending along the right way. And this will give us a little bit of an opportunity to make some future plans, right? How's this trend going? What is it looking like? What kind of things do we need to actually probably anticipate? And of course, it is all just a huge gamble, right? Because we don't know what the weather is going to do at any one point in time. We can always anticipate, but we can't necessarily get it right. So because it is going to do it. So as far as water supplies, I think we're looking okay. We're doing all right. If we can continue some fall in going to be okay. It's really when we get to that May, June timeframe is when we really need to look at our supplies and where we're going. And we'll talk more about how we address these issues when we get a little more into the water efficiency. Uh, uh, in Texas, outdoor use is the driver of water use, right? Especially in the summertime. In the summer, we can anticipate that 60 to 70% of all of our municipal water that we use in homes goes to outdoor watering, right? So a lot of this is lawn watering, landscape watering, is pretty, it's a lot. It's a lot of water. And um, that is a luxury, right? So it is a luxury use water. So when we get into drought conditions, that's when we will start to see restrictions on that outdoor water use. So what we will try to cover in this presentation is how we prepare our lawns for the next drought, right? We don't know when the next drought is. We know we'll be here at some point, but we just don't know how long it's going to last or how intense it is going to be. So we need to be sure that we are in the right position. So when we look at this chart here from, this is a company called Flume, and Flume does a lot of water data analysis. So they will look at water data from participating utilities. They will look at trends in water use. So this little snapshot is from a study that they did in 2021. This is quarter 4 of their study. So this is in the wintertime, basically. So water usage should be pretty low at this point, right? And of course, we're looking at just August, and you see that the gallons per household used, right? So GPCD basically is gallons per capita per day is what GPCD stands for. That measure that municipalities use to determine water use, right? So it is a little bit of a math equation, right? They're assuming X amount of people household, and then they are taking the total amount of water and sort of used and dividing that up and coming up with what they call a GPCD, a gallons per person per day. This is a little different. They're looking at gallons per household, right? So they're really just looking at the water being used in the meter, not really what individual people are using. And for outdoor water space, because now you're really seeing just the water that is being used, and they can isolate the outdoor water from the indoor water just by looking at the flows that's going through the meter, right? When you turn on an irrigation system, you're gonna see really high flow of water, as opposed to when you flush a toilet, you're gonna see a higher flow of water, but it's for a very short period of time. Or a shower, you're not gonna get these dramatic flows like you are when you turn on an irrigation system. So able to look at data and isolate what the water is. You can see during this period of time, right, the Dallas Fort Worth area is in that yellow range, that yellow area, which is really too high, right? 2021, pretty hot year, I would suspect. I'm looking on this, we have average temperatures, not in small, and then of course have the total precipitation in the bottom. And we weren't, our total precipitation was about 8 inches, yet our usage was still pretty high. So that's that we are using an excess amount of water, and we're not really focusing on the weather, not utilizing the rainfall that we should. For us, and especially for an area that receives a 35 or so inches of rainfall in the area, you see that we certainly are not being very conscious of that water use. So looking at the amount of water that's used and how it's broken up, you can see that this little chart here on the left has 72% of the water used is goes to residential use, right? So, and that includes irrigation. We can break it down into what is municipal use, which is going to be, um, many of your like smaller type of municipal projects and things like that. So whatever the city services are generally, and then commercial use, golf courses, and educational. And you can see that residential water use really is the big driver. It is the exceptional use of water, and everywhere you go, people always want to point their finger at other uses, right? Especially large, high profile uses, right? Nobody wants to go to the, whatever the shopping center and see sprinklers in the little park medians spraying and, and as unnecessary use of water. And it is a waste. I'm not defending that in any way, shape, or form. Because I don't like that either, but it's sort of a little bit, I guess, calling the kettle black, I suppose, is a term that's used. You really, as the residential use is really the thing that we need to target on, because that is where the biggest driver is. And when we look at the chart on the right and see again, this is from the Texas Water Development Board. This chart on the right from Water, I think from the 2022 water plan, you can see the demand in these different colors, right? So the orange and the red are high demand areas, where water demand is very, very high. And then you can see the green are in the lower demand areas. And you can see very, rainfall based and very population based, right? So we see a lot high demand area in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So these letters on here, so sorry, I should probably clarify that. The water plan is broken up into regions. So each one of these letters indicates a region, and each region updates their regional water plan every year, and every 5 years the overall state plan is updated based on these regional water plans. So I know that's a little confusing, and we could probably do a whole hour on just the water planning process, but what these letters are, just to make sure that you guys are like, what do the letters mean? So uh, just the distribution of from high to low usage throughout the state, which is really interesting. But you can see it really does kind of follow weather patterns to quite an extent. So now when we look at again looking at more outdoor water use, you can see where the drive is, right? So the medium to large or medium-sized utilities are really pushing the boundaries, right? And that is going to be where we're really seeing a lot of growth, right? So we have our large utilities for big areas, our metropolitan areas, but we're seeing so much growth in the suburban areas that we're really starting to push water use a lot in those. And then when we look at, again, the distribution of usage based on these various water users, we'll call them, these like municipality areas, you can really get a sense, right? So the dark blue is single family, right? So when we look at a medium utility and we see that driver of single family, right, we have to think about these mostly, I guess they used to be called bedroom communities, right? There's just a lot of residents in there and not a lot of other industry that uses water. So in the Dallas Fort Worth area, that is going to be a lot of your high growth areas, like If you're out west, right, we can think about Watauga, some of those areas out there. I can't really think of Aledo. Then if you go to the north of the Dallas area proper, right north of Plano, you get into all of those. So Anna, Melissa, Prosper, Josephine. If it's like all of the cities in that have like days seem to fit in this area. These are just seeing just extreme growth, right? And it is almost totally residential. So you can really see that spike in use. And then the multifamily obviously is going to be larger in some of the metropolitan areas, commercial, industrial. But the other thing to note is the agricultural, right? That is that slim little purple line at the top. And it is almost it is totally gone out of the metropolitan area, is very, very small in the large, and there's only a little bit hanging on in the medium size utility, and that's because we're those communities are being built in this like transition zone, right? If they're moving from rural to suburban to possibly urban, right? So they're kind of making that transformation as that grazed land eventually changes over from grazeland to residential property, then we'll continue to see that that irrigate or that agricultural water usage disappear. So, and we know that the residential water use is a lot higher than our agricultural use. So we're seeing a shift in that water use, and we're seeing that demand increase. So if we just have from the Texas Water Development Board, right, we can see that in our large urban regions, okay, right. So if we look again at our little map here to the left side, that has our distribution of our regions for the state planning purposes, right. We'll see C, H, and pretty much K and L, right, are all of our largest urban areas, right? So C is the Dallas Fort Worth area, right? H is going to be the Houston Gulf Coast, and then K and L kind of make up that Austin, San Antonio, Hill Country area, where we're really starting to see a lot of growth, and you can see the demand on these charts. It just absolutely follows that pattern whatsoever. The demand in Region C, the Dallas Fort Worth area, is going to almost double. When you look at this by 2070. Same with H, not quite doubling, but really excessive, and then a lot of growth in M, right, which is way down in at the end, I guess, at the valley area of Texas. We're seeing an increase down there too. So anticipating a lot more water usage down there. Now, I don't know. This is not broken down too much, right? But this is municipal demand, right? They are looking at municipal demand, so they are anticipating this to be really household type growth in here. So something they know that we don't, as far as that area down there goes. All right, so one of the interesting things about the water plan, and I promise you this is all going somewhere. This will all come to a head at some point during this presentation. One of the things that is in the water plan, the state water plan, is management measures to achieve shortfalls in water, right? So if a region has a shortfall in demand, they build in measures to take to actually meet those demands, right? And it's not always developing water supplies. In every single region, in the water plan, water conservation is in there, even in East Texas, where they really have more supply than they do demand, right? So, which is good and bad, could become a curse at some point as people start really, these other more thirsty and start looking at the water that's in the East. But even though there is an excess amount of water, right, conservation is still built into that. And conservation is um, in every single one, and that is this like mint color bar in here. They call it demand management, right? So this is everything from that really includes a reduction in water use, right? So water conservation type measures, which can be improving leaks and things in distribution systems, curbing outdoor water use. I mean, a whole list of these management strategies. But you can see in the different regions, especially A, right, which is heavy agricultural region up in the top of the panhandle, right? They're really looking at how to get more efficient with agricultural water use in that area, right? And there's different reasons for that. Of course, they're pulling from local aquifers, not as much surface water, right? Because there's not as much rainfall. So that is a heavy, heavy demand. But when we look at region C, it is a pretty good chunk of where they anticipate supplies to come from. H as well, another really good chunk. And then, of course, you look at the blue, that's the surface water thing, right? So, the Houston Gulf Coast area is trying to move away from groundwater supplies to surface water supplies to protect from subsidence, right? They are actually sinking because of the groundwater withdrawals. So they have a really heavy influence on trying to go to more surface. And then, of course, you can see K and L again, really, really heavy on the water conservation area in those areas. So as we move through the presentation, we're going to see how really important water conservation is to meeting our future demands. Okay, so this is a saying that was said by Dave Rocket when he actually lost his bid for re-election to the Tennessee State Senate. And at that point, he said basically that he was going to go find a new place, a new thing to do. So he headed to Texas. And I want to say that this seems to be a pretty good sentiment for the rest of the United States at this point. When we think about the influx of people coming into the state, it is, and it has been this way, right, for many, 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 many years, right? We just start really kind of focusing on it now, but I think we're seeing a little bit bigger volume of people coming in because now we're really starting to see a lot more industry moving in and bringing those people with industry with them to Texas. But Texas has always been a desirable place to live for people all over the country. And of course, y'all are here, so you get it. You know why people want to be here. Those of you that have been here your whole life, you can't really imagine living anywhere else. Well, I mean, you can, right? We can. I always have these. My wife calls them delusions of living somewhere, like in Vermont or, somewhere, you get seasons and all this stuff. And she always tells me that I won't be able to, I won't survive a winter up there. And she's probably right. But Texas is a pretty great place. We have everything that we need here. We got so much diversity, corner to corner in this state. You just have to go find it. You have to go seek it out. But when we look at people moving around in the country, this is a little graphic that shows the people that have left Texas in 2023. Right, so 479,000 people have left Texas in 2023, and these are the places they went. Right, went to California, they went to Colorado, they went to Oklahoma for some reason, they went to Georgia, and they went to Florida. Okay, so a lot of people just moving around for whatever reason they are leaving Texas. So when we look at the amount of people that moved to Texas in 2023, right, we had 612,000 people move into Texas. So, and where did they come from? Oklahoma, Florida, New York, and Louisiana, right? So we're kind of just trading folks, right? We're kind of just trading folks some in there. So if we lost 400 and something thousand, but we gained 600 and something thousand, we have a net increase of 133,000 people. So that is a fair amount of people still moving into the state of Texas on a yearly basis, right? So what is also interesting is a statistic, and I don't have a slide for that on here, is in 2023, a little over 3 million people, 3.3 million people to be exact, moved within the state of Texas. So 3.3 million people packed up from where they were in the state of Texas and moved somewhere else in the state of Texas. So a lot of that movement is to more up and coming areas, right? Let's say people moved out of Plano, Texas, right, and then moved to kind of get out of that congestion and move to Melissa or Anna, or people moved out of like Fort Worth to go out to Aledo, anything like that, right? So there's quite a bit of movement within the state of Texas, and that also has an impact on our water and how water is used, especially if they are moving to master planned communities. Now, if we look at this, you can see what are the fastest growing cities in the United States, right? So there are a lot of TXs on this list, and a lot of them are in the DFW area, right? Salina, Princeton, Anna, Prosper, Forney, and then there are a few in the Hill Country area, right? So we have Kyle and we have Georgetown. And Georgetown is one of those places that I will say there is a large influx of people moving from Austin to Georgetown. So they're skipping over Pflugerville and driving to Georgetown because it is a pretty cool, hip little city. But if you've ever spent any time in Georgetown, um, you will recognize how that has changed with the influx of new and younger people moving into that community. And then, of course, there's a few other places on here. So some places in Florida and South Carolina that are growing extensively, but Texas has the majority of people on this and all of people. You can see kind of some statistics on the right hand side of the presentation there, and it is really staggering. So how much is going on? And when we look at population growth in the state of Texas compared to the United States, right? You can also see this. You can also see how Texas is really the fastest growing state in the United States. California and Florida are not far behind at all. Um, with growth rates, but you can see that Texas is still the hotspot that people want to go to. And and for those that are new to Texas, especially if you're moving from someplace that is more of a even keel type of climate, when you start to experience Texas summer, you're going to realize quickly that it's hot. And then again, just some more numbers, bringing it a little bit tighter into the state and looking at some of the different counties. So Kaufman County, which is Kaufman and Hunt County, are two counties that are on the eastern side of the Metroplex, right? So they are stretching the Metroplex out. We're getting really close to Hopkins County, where Sulphur Springs is. We are really starting to look at how the Metroplex is stretching. And then, of course, to the west, right, on the west side of Tarrant County is Parker County, which did not make this list, but there's tremendous amount of growth in Parker County. And our growth goes all the way to Red River now. So we're starting to really see this expanse all the way up into Grayson County and Fannin County, which border Oklahoma up to the north. But for the most part, people are getting a little closer to and which again we're seeing Collin County as one of the fastest growing counties in the state. We're seeing quite a bit of growth there, and of course, Denton County is always a contender in there, but don't seem to be growing quite as quick. Um, so this is kind of a mind-blowing little graphic, and these numbers to the right are out of date, right? So down forward some points we probably should really now. Um, so I do need to update that. So I apologize. But at the time, these are the counties that are in the Metroplex right here, these little blue counties, right? And it is really just like a 6 county area. And these are all the states in the United States that have less population than the DFW region. So, um, pretty amazing when you look at it. Actually frightening when you really think about how large these states are, and then how diverse that or spread out the population must really be in those areas, and then how dense the population is in the DFW area. So we're getting close to break time. So we have a few more slides, and then we'll take a little break here. But again, going back to the state water plan and looking at population growth, the anticipation is that by 2070, right, we will hit some staggering population numbers, right? Close to 60 million folks in the state of Texas, which is a lot, right? You think traffic's bad now? Just wait until 2070. Of course, by 2070, right, we'll be flying in flying cars. Of course, they've been promising us flying cars since Jetsons. Many of y'all may remember the cartoon The Jetsons. And really you can draw some pretty interesting um, facts from the Jetsons to what we have today. Rosie, the robot cleaner. I don't. We're pretty close to having our own Rosies. We do have Rumba vacuums, right, that run around, or robot vacuums that run around. So closest thing we have right now to Rosie and maybe in the future. So that should be confusing for all of us. Okay, so looking at demand, water demand, right? So with the projected population growth that we have and our existing water supplies, it is anticipated that these crayon drawing lines that the Water Development Board have posted on here doesn't look like much, but the fact is demand is outpacing existing supply by a large margin, right? That is a pretty large gap when we get out towards the end there, which is 2070. There is no access on here that show the dates for some reason or another. I've looked at this a number of, but bottom line is demand is going to exceed supply. So hence all of the water conservation, right? The water conservation is our most accessible resource, right? It's the cheapest because it's water that we already have. We just need to be more efficient with the way that we use it. And we use less, we keep more behind our dams, and we keep our supplies available for it. And for any of y'all who don't know, there is no natural reservoirs in the state of Texas, with the exception, before everybody just grumbles at me about Caddo Lake being the only naturally occurring lake, and that is true, it is. But I do believe historically that has even been modified by the hand of man over the years. But every reservoir we have in the state of Texas has been built by man. So that is how our supplies are distributed in the state of Texas airs. I mean, of course, we have springs and we have other like small, like little ponds and what they might call lakes, but they're all very tiny compared to what our drinking water reservoirs are. So again, looking at our demands by category, water user category, you can see irrigation demand, which is farming essentially, right? So ranching, farming, that type of thing. That is traditionally irrigation. We do use the term irrigation for household use, but it's really more sprinkling than it is irrigation. But technically, when the term irrigation is used, it is for larger irrigation type of use for farming practices. But you can see here clearly that the expectation is that municipal use will pass the demand for irrigation use, and pretty much everything else is flatlining down at the bottom there, with manufacturing, steam, electric, mining, all of that stuff. And we're really just focused on the municipal use because that is where we're seeing the most impact. So here is another slide from our friends at the Texas Water Development Board from the water plan. And here it is, the regions broken up in here with the water demands, right? So the red is municipal demand, right? And you can see there's some pretty big chunks of pie eaten out of these areas, if you want to look at it that way, or not much pie left. Maybe the red is the municipal use, right? And again, right, this tracks pretty well with our urban areas, those K, L, C, and H regions. But right, looking in the Panhandle and looking in down in Region M, right, we're still seeing a tremendous amount of irrigation use in those areas. Um, but it is projected by 2060 that municipal demand will pass the irrigation demand in the state of Texas. So that is interesting, right? That is fascinating to really look at that. And when we look at the I-35 corridor per se, right? Let's say all the way down, you can see how the land continues to go in those areas on the I-35 corridor. So here we are, break time. Finally, that is perfect. We need this. Let's take a little bit of a break. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We can answer them during the break, but let's uh let's take about 10 minutes. Does that sound good to everybody? A little 10-minute kind of stretch break, refresh your coffee, get a snack, go to the restroom, do whatever you need to do. So let's be back at because it is 9:59 right now. Right. So let's just be back at 10:10. Let's see. All right. Excellent. See y'all in a minute.
Dean, you ready to get going?
We certainly can get back to it.
Sounds great. If you're ready, I didn't see any questions coming in. I think I saw one earlier that I bet you answered. It was like in the middle, and I think you kept going. So probably got that one answered.
Yeah, there was a question in here running through that says, I'm in
Yeah.
Texas and unaware of what a water permit is. So I certainly can explain that because it's pretty important, especially to somebody in rural Texas. So Texas is uh, a water rights state, right? So it is a first in time, first in right state. So if you want to use water out of any water body in the state of Texas for any purpose other than domestic and livestock use, a permit is required. So if you live on the banks of a river, then you are entitled to 200 acre feet per year of water for domestic and livestock use, and that is domestic and livestock use is defined essentially as watering cattle, watering your yard, watering your home garden. But as soon as you start taking that water and using it for financial gain, then you are now in violation of the rules of the water use and you need to apply for a permit for that water. First in time, first in means that the first permits issued have the right to the water. So if a person that lives stream from you has a water right from the let's say 1900, and you have a water right downstream from them from 1920, the person with the 1900 water right has priority and does not have to release water for you to use for your 1920 permit. So it is an interesting way. It's been that way in the state of Texas for ages, well, since the beginning of water right, I guess. And there are some areas in the state where they have a person designated as a water master, and that person helps with regulate the use of water between different water rights. And pretty much everything in the state is allocated under some kind of water right. So getting a water right for a particular purpose is not easy, and there are some interesting rules. If you purchase a water right and you change the use on that water right, so if you purchase an agricultural water use and you want to convert it to municipal use, then you actually lose your date designation on that permit. So it's a tough rule. It's a hard rule, but it is the way it is. So I hope that explains it to you. That is the very brief explanation of water rights in the state. Okay, so let's get back into it. All right, so now let's really look at how water is used in the landscape, really. So, and kind of some of the things that we need to do. So, we're going to get into a little bit more of um, starting to work a little bit more to the technical side of all of this. So what we're going to really look at is drought avoidance, right? So that is kind of the ultimate goal for a lot of our landscapes is how do we get it to sustain during dry periods, right? So we did talk about that, how, the next drought is really just around the corner. And we need to make sure that our landscapes are able to sustain that dry period. So a little bit about that. We'll talk about how much water does a landscape really use. Hence, really more like focused towards turf grass, like I mentioned before. And then we'll talk about some watering methods and some general technology that is used. Okay, so let's kind of get right into sort of the reason for drought avoidance. in landscapes. So right now, 2025 is when a large amount of water conservation and drought contingency plans are due to the state. So to kind of clarify that statement, every municipality, every water provider in Texas is required to have a drought contingency plan. If they are over 3,300 connections, then that water provider is required to submit that drought contingency plan to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for review and approval. So there's two different documents that are required in the state of Texas: a water conservation plan, which is a year-round savings, right? So water conservation plan is sort of that roadmap. How is a municipality going to reduce the amount of water that is used over the long period of time, right? So if you go back and think about the slides, excuse me, wipe my nose real quick, um, from the state water plan, and it had water conservation or demand management built into each of those regions, right? So this is part of that demand management, right? Water conservation. That is a 365-day a year planning document for reducing overall water use, right? So then there's the drought contingent plan. Drought contingent plan is sometimes referred to as a water emergency management plan, and that's really more what it is. Like if there is an up shortage in water supply, then the drought contingency plan can be initiated quickly and achieve a swift reduction in water use, right? So it is not meant to be a permanent reduction in water use. It is meant to be an aggressive reduction in water use to meet a short-term deficit in water supply. It might be drought, that might be, a major whatever, anything that is actually causing a disruption in water service. So the city of Austin, so those plans are due to the state in 2020. They need to be updated every 5 years with new stats and numbers, and we won't really get into that. But almost every water conservation plan is a little bit different across the state, right? So some of our bigger ones, the city of Austin is getting pretty aggressive with their water conservation plan. They have a once per week watering schedule for the city of Austin, right? A lot of other places around the state have a twice per week. The city of Austin has a once per week watering restriction, and then they also have stages built in to their plan, sort of like a drought contingency plan would have, but they have stages built in to where they will squeeze the water window down a little bit tighter, making a little bit harder to use irrigation water on your lawn, or harder to use during times when it's not necessary. So they are really working pretty diligently on both of their plans to meet their city goals, and to meet the region expectations of reducing water use. SAWS, San Antonio Water System, is again like another one of those communities in the hill country that is central Texas, that is gripped by extended drought conditions, not really a good situation. So they are certainly looking for ways to reduce demands over a long period of time. And one of the things they have done is they have moved past citations being issued through municipal court. So one of the things that the drought contingency plan allows for is municipalities to adopt that as an ordinance, and adopting it as an ordinance allows them to issue fines, citations through the municipal court system. So cities have, misdemeanor fines for violating the drought contingency plan when it is active. So, but what causes is they have bypassed the courts because the courts get pretty backed up with a lot of these fines that are issued and are now just putting it directly on the violators' bill. So, whatever those rates are, whatever those, I don't know, but they are slapping them violators right in the mailbox. So, on those fees right on their bills to try to get some compliance with some of these necessary things. And then the other thing that they are doing, which is interesting, is they are limiting drip irrigation. So they have realized that a drip system can use as much water as a spray irrigation system can use. Um, and they tend to be uh, abused pretty regularly. So now they are limiting the use of drip irrigation in landscapes to pretty confining watering windows, which is just another way to try to get a hold of the outdoor water use, which of course we know is the biggest water use, right? And then of course Dallas Water Utilities, again, very aggressively seeking reductions in their water use. I know there's a lot going on here, but you can see the chart on the top right. Here is that GPCD that I talked about earlier, that gallons per capita per day measurement, right? So they have established their goals, right? Their 5-year goals and their 10-year goals, and their 5-year goals are to try and get that gallons per capita per day down, right? So 5 and 10 years to 168 to 160. And then of course they have, their residential use and their water loss use. So they're looking at water loss through system, delivery system, and trying to get a hold of that. And then so if you look over to the right, this chart shows the recommended strategies for Dallas water utilities to meet their water needs and their demands. And of course, you see right there, the very top one is additional conservation. And they're looking at what is the available predicted supply, and then what is the cost. I don't know if you can really see that, but it is a fraction of the amount of money from going down the list and looking at just river basin supply, right? Again, so I did tell you guys that the east, water rich east, these communities are in the DFW area are going to start looking at those water supplies and how to get those supplies to the populous areas, and so that will be a fight that will ensue from those areas as what intermittent transfer issues, there's in-stream flow issues, fishery issues. It's going to be interesting. So, and then of course, anything developing more resources, you can see the amount of money that it takes for those. So again, conservation is where they're really looking because that is the most cost-effective way for them to get their supplies. And of course, by using conservation, right, we are talking about reducing the amount of water used outdoors. So we can talk about drought avoidance in that term, right? But we can also talk about it as just sustainability in a way, if you use that word, or being able to, for our landscape, without stress from one watering to the next, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a drought, but we do need to get our landscapes to sustain between watering events, and we need to be able to extend those watering events out farther and farther and farther. Right? So we need to talk a little bit about warm season turf grass, right? Because that is what we use Unless you're in the Panhandle area, then there's going to be some other uses of turf grass. But generally in the state of Texas, we're going to use warm season turf grass, and we'll talk a little bit about why we use warm season turf grass for sure. Well, this chart really kind of gives you that indication. You got the shoot growth and the root growth of a cool season grass. You can see that that happens in the spring and in the fall, right? And then there's a decline, but generally, right? That's during the summer months. That's when we're getting our temperatures where turf grass really likes to grow better, right? So it's too hot in the summer for us to be able to grow. It's really too hot in the spring for us to be able to grow a cool season turf grass. So that's why we see cool season grass is being used for overseeding in their time, because you can see that is when the conditions are more favorable for the type of grass, but not in the summer. But if you look at the warm season turf grass, you can see during the summer, that is when it is most favorable, right? When our temperatures reach like 80 to 95 degrees, that is really the active, very most active growth period for warm season turf grass, which really is a large part of our growing season, right? We will start hitting those temperatures in April, and we will not back off of those temperatures probably until October, really. So we have a pretty long growing season that is conducive for warm season turf grass. So again, looking at like the various characteristics and why we choose warm season turf grass over cool season turf grass is we were looking for something that is efficient, right? So we're looking for something that is efficient in its water use, right? So it's not excessive. Cool season turf grass, to get it to grow during our summer, we're going to have to use excessive amounts of water on it. We need something that's efficient. I do and then, of course, our ideal temperature range, if you look at that 80 to 95 degrees, like I said before, if you look at the ideal temperature range for cool season grass, 60 to 75, I mean, that really is like our spring and our fall, maybe even our winter. When we think about like right now in the DFW area, I think I woke up this morning, it was 13 degrees. With I think an expected high of like 30. Our average, our typical temperature for this time of year is in the 60s, right? So we are unreasonably cool right now. So we, it's our ideal growing range is not that good for cool season turf grasses, because we will eventually exceed that very quickly. And then we need something that's drought hardy and something that has good stress recovery, right? And we'll talk a little more about turf grass stress and how that impacts um, water use. So when we think about warm season turf grass and turf grass for master gardener, right, it's important to know the differences of what we're really growing out there. So it's been said to me that master gardeners really will mostly deal with the three T's in Texas, right? So turf, trees, and tomatoes. So right now, you're going to get a little primer on the turf, because this is important if you are work any kind of help desk, or if you're educating homeowners or anything else. You are going to get questions about turf, either turf disease, turf decline, turf mowing, whatever, fertilizing, all that stuff. You're going to get questions, and it's good to know the different types of turf that we actually, turf grass, I need to say, that we have out there in our residential areas. St. Augustine, lots of different grasses, varieties, right? Mostly what we see in the DFW area is Raleigh. We see a little bit of palmetto. when you get down farther south Texas where it's warmer, right? You might be able to get away with a little Florida tam. But we're generally going to see probably that Raleigh and Palmetto in, for the most part, throughout Texas. There is a new one called Cobalt that's on the bottom of this list. There's another one too called Scott's Provista, which is an interesting grass developed by the Scott's Company. And that is was developed by them to be, I don't know really how to say this, glyphosate resistant in a way, I guess so, or tolerant. Apparently, their claim is you can really just like soak this seed grass in glyphosate and it will not harm the grass. Now, the good or bad, I don't really know. I'm going to probably go with that's probably not a desirable trait that I want. I don't really, we don't really need to see more use of like a single type of herbicide out there because we're starting to see a lot of resistance build up in various types of herbicides. So I don't think that's a good thing, but whatever, that's what they want. So, and that is publicly available on the market, right? So, cobalt is a hybrid same grass that we've been um, testing in a lot of different studies, mostly pitting it against Bermuda grass and zoysia grass, and it is showing um, better quality. It is showing lower water use than Bermuda and zoysia grass, more pest resistance, more disease resistance, better shade tolerance, and deeper rooting. Right, so this is a great St. Augustine variety that is actually outcompeting Tiff Tuff Bermuda grass. So if we look at the Bermuda grasses, we have lots of hybrids on this list. There's common Bermuda grass, which a lot of people tend to use. That's really in a lot of fields and and just large open space areas. Um, but like your sports fields, generally, right, we're going to see more of the hybrids, and we're starting to see the hybrids being used in landscapes too on residential properties. And I'll tell you this quick little story. So I'm a car nut. It's kind of a family disease, but I purchased a car online and I went to Houston to pick this car up. It was in a community in the Woodlands, and everybody's lawn, right, was just like a sports field. It was like just stepping onto a golf course. They were all cut like just so close to the ground. There's probably absolutely no rooting depth on any of these grasses. Um, but while I was buying the car, the person next door, right, came out of their house with a striping machine. They were actually getting ready to stripe their lawn just like you would a baseball field outfield. And I was like, you guys take turf grass all the way to the next level, but only achievable with a hybrid type of turf grass. I'm not saying it's good or bad. Whatever those people want to do, it's fine. Um, but I had never really seen that amount of groomed turf grass anywhere before in my existence. But going back to Bermuda grass, we got a few that I'll just mention real quickly. Latitude 36. Um, that is a pretty popular grass that is being used at Texas A&M at Kyle Field on the football field, right? That is a pretty solid, water efficient, stress tolerant Bermuda grass that is being used. Northbridge is one that has a lot of cold tolerance that is being used in the PGA golf course in the fairways in the DFW area, actually in Frisco to be exact. That new PGA course there, Tahoma 31, another hybrid Bermuda that has great cold tolerance that is actually being used in Arkansas on their football field. And then Tipway 419 has always been a popular model, but now Tough, which is developed out of Tifton, Georgia, is being used at the TCU Amon Carter football field, and it is one that is really taking off for residential usage. Right, you can grow it a little bit taller. It's got good rooting depth. It's got good pest resistance, and it is one that we have been comparing the Cobalt against pretty regularly. So, still a great option for a turf grass. Um, Zoysias, again, super popular. Palisades is probably what we see the most used up here in the DFW area. Palisades has a little bit wider of a blade of grass. It's sort of not quite as thick as a St. Augustine, but definitely thicker than a Bermuda grass. So it kind of is a happy medium, has some good shade tolerance. A lot of people seem to gravitate towards that one. And then, of course, buffalo grass is a prairie grass that is really only good west of I-35 for the most part. If you are really looking at uh, um, using buffalo grass east of I-35, it may be quite a challenge because it's just too wet over there. So here's a question. Can you oversee latitude over common Bermuda grass? Yes, if you can get it in a seed form. Sometimes, right, it's only available in either plugs or sod, depending. But you can always intermix, right? There's always this mix thing where you can sort of blend. They kind of call it blending. You can blend the two, Bermudas that you have together. And then, of course, one of them is going to dominate over the other one. So you can always do that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot of plugging, especially of St. Augustine grasses, where they'll instead of like completely scraping yard, they will start to plug in a different variety and let it actually take over. So yes, you can do those type of things. Um, how short should you mow Xeon Zoysia? Well, I think we have some science here about maybe with stress. Really, it's going to follow more of the Bermuda, which is really at like a minimum is going to be like 3/4 of an inch to an inch, and you're probably going to want to use a reel mower when you're getting down that low. So probably going to be more like an inch and a half, but I'm sure I've got a slide on that. So we'll see when we get up there. So great questions. Thanks for letting me know you guys are out there in the world and not sleeping, paying attention, which is good. It's always nice to have people pay attention. So disease is always an issue with all these grasses, but so we have to keep that in mind. But picking the right variety for your conditions is really, really important, right? So I see it a lot where somebody wants they want to redo their yard or whatever, and they talk to whoever their landscape guy is, and their landscape guy knows like three varieties, right? He knows like common Bermuda, or Raleigh, St. Augustine, but he doesn't really know about all the other varieties. He doesn't really know the aspects. He's not looking at the whole picture, right? So if you have dry, full sun area, then you obviously want to go with Bermuda or buffaloes. You're going to be your best bets on that. If you have shade, right, then nothing beats St. Augustine for shade, right? And that is it's an interesting dynamic where we have a lot of municipalities or homeowner associations or whatever neighborhoods that are actually outlawing St. Augustine grass. There are people that are they are consulting these communities on native and adapted landscaping, and they are generally outlawing or putting recommending prohibitions on St. Augustine grass based on nothing more than a some thoughts that it is a more water egregious turf grass, and however, there are also these communities that require 2 trees to be planted in every yard, right? So in 10 years, you have a lot of shade, right? These trees grow up, you have shade from your own trees, your neighbor's trees, trees create, right? So then, but yet maybe there's a requirement that you have to have turf grass on your lawn. So now really you've kind of pigeonholed yourself to only really using St. Augustine grass, and it's not accessible in your area. So it is sort of a terrible situation, especially when we have new varieties like cobalt that are out that are really showing a tremendous amount of water savings compared to even Bermuda grasses. Um, and then of course traffic, if you have dogs, if you have kids that play in the yard, maybe you're on the corner house by the bus stop and there's always people trampling across the yard, then of course Bermuda grass is going to handle that stress better than a lot of other grasses. Hence the reason why Bermuda is the right choice for sports fields. And then going on down the line, low mowing, how do you want to mow it? And then cold temperatures, and that's one of the reasons that are a little bit um, not as good for like certain situations is because they tend to grow pretty slow. They tend to recover from stress pretty slow, hence the not having to mow as often, right? So, but if it's in a stressful situation, it may not have that opportunity to recover. So, you definitely want to keep that in consideration. And then, of course, I already talked about disease. These are all susceptible to disease, but most of these issues are really are really just man-made, right? So we tend to see large patch or take all root rot. Some of these things in St. Augustine, but what when we really look at it, what is happening is there is an overuse of fertilizer and overwatering or improper watering practices. All of these various funguses and things that we see in turfgrass occur naturally in our soil. It's just when the conditions are ripe, then they will flourish and cause these disease issues. And a lot of times, by like watering it at nighttime in the summer excessively, using high nitrogen fertilizers too deep into the summer, right? We add a lot of fuel to that fire, and we can see flare-ups of those different types of diseases, especially in St. Augustine grass. So a lot of those can be managed by just simple, appropriate turf grass management um, measures. So, looking at some of the other grasses here and some of their strengths and weaknesses, just a really good chart to kind of keep in mind if you want to install a grass, or if you get somebody asks you your opinion on what to install, and you can kind of go through some of these things like, what do they want? What do they not want for it? What do they want to do with it? And then, what are some of these strengths and weaknesses of these grasses, and then kind of help narrow down what might really be the best option. So, because of course, we want to get something that somebody wants, but then you have to be realistic about the practicality of it, right? Is it really the right grass for them? It's right plant, right place. That's pretty typical response for everything, and it goes all the way to turf grass to all the way up to uh, you know roses, right? I mean, it's all like everything in between, right plant, right place for all of it. So sunlight requirements, though, this is the kicker is we have to have sunlight, right? That's it for turf grass. There is no way around it. Just like every other plant, photosynthesis is what makes turf grass grow. And without sunlight, photosynthesis. So, St. Augustine grass is one of our better grasses in shadier environments because of that wide blade, right? So, wide blade helps collect more sunlight for more photosynthesis for it to grow better. So if you have a shady situation and you have St. Augustine grass, then you actually really want to mow it a little bit higher than what is recommended in those shady areas because you want to increase that leaf surface. You want to increase the amount of surface available to capture sunlight for photosynthesis so it will continue to thrive in those conditions. And then, of course, Bermuda grass needs a lot of sunlight. And, we think about it's a very fine blade, very small blade. So again, really increasing that amount of photosynthesis by being out in the sun. Now, if we think about drought tolerance, right? So, what is going to be better in a drought situation? And you can only think about from, Texas, really from west to east, um, as well with buffalo grass being, that great prairie grass. It likes to exist in the open sun, in the prairie, straight down through the middle of the state. Um, and it very little fuss. It does not like water whatsoever, right? If you water buffalo grass, you try to treat it like any other warm season grass, it's going to decline and it's going to get weedy and it is not going to behave appropriately, right? So the less attention you pay to buffalo grass, the better off it generally is in a lot of cases. So and then on down the line, of course, Bermuda, and then some of your zoysias, right? On down into to like basically East Texas, where centipede grass and stuff is more popular in those more where there's more rainfall, heavy rainfall. So, talking again about drought avoidance. Rooting depth is it, right? That is the key for rooting for any type of drought avoidance, right? The farther, the deeper our roots are, the more moisture we're going to be able to contain, right? So if you are in an area where we have clay soils or even loamy soils, right, then we've got some water holding capacity there. We've got the ability to grow deeper roots, right? Appropriate watering and lawn management is how we're going to get those deep roots. If you think about a sports field, right, and you think about how much input they put into that field, right? They're mowing it like almost every day or every other day, especially on a golf course to maintain a certain play surface. They're fertilizing it a lot because there's a lot of stress on it from being mowed and being run on top of, by people with cleats and stuff. There really is no root structure to those, right? Because of all the inputs that they're putting in. It's a very shallow root structure there. But that is because they are trying to maintain a certain surface for a certain activity. For a residential lawn, right? We don't need that. We do not need a putting green in our front lawn. We do not need a baseball outfield in our backyard, although it would be wonderful, especially if it were like games there every day and we could just sit and watch baseball. That would be fantastic. But what we need in these areas is we need that rooting depth because we want to make sure that our plant material looks good and stays healthy throughout the growing season. And that's the bottom line is health, right? Healthy landscape with as little amount of water as we need to give it, especially avoiding any type of wasteful watering situations. So, um, continuing on the theme of this deep rooting, right? So there was a study that was done in 2008, and this is a study that really needs to be redone. There's a lot of new varieties of turf grass out, and this would be great, but obviously, I don't have several $1 million to do this. If any of y'all do and want to write a check for a giant grant for AgriLife to redo this study, please raise your hand. So we will be happy to do it. So anyway, this study was done by AgriLife, San Antonio Water Systems, and the turf grass for the study was provided by the turf producers of Texas. So they took 25 varieties of turf grass, everything from St. Augustine, Bermuda, Zoysia, and Buffalo, and planted them on two different depths of soil, right? So one planted on what they called the native depth, which was a minimum of 12 inches. And the other was planted on a 4-inch depth of soil. They were planted in this rain out shelter. You can see that roof, whenever a little bit of rain would fall, that roof would automatically close, therefore exposing these turf grasses to drought, right? To just dry, nothing, no rain, no watering, no nothing, right? So for 60 days, they were exposed to drought. So during that period, right, we can see by this chart what happened to these various grasses, right? You can see the decline over time here for the days. You can see it did not fare well in the drought, right? It declined the fastest and the earliest. It did not like drought conditions. So it declined sooner than everything else. The St. Augustine, not too far behind it's that green line. The Bermuda grass hung on pretty well, but again, it does have a lot of drought resistance built into it. And then, of course, buffalo grass was probably as happy as it could be as soon as the water turned off, and it actually started to do pretty well. And that's the nature of buffalo, right? We understand that. So pretty much everything, excuse me, everything declined. Everything went brown or dormant or fired or whatever terms you want to use. But everything pretty much just went blonde for summer. It all just went brown. So after the 60-day period of drought, then the recovery period started. So now if we look at this, the pink line is everything planted on 4-inch depth soil. The purple line is everything planted on the native depth of soil, right? So that was at 12-inch or more depth of soil. And as you can see, nothing in the 4-inch range recovered, right? Sorry for you people in the central Texas and the hill country where you have very, very shallow soils. Turf grass is a very, very difficult thing to grow. It was there. But you see that everything on the native depth of soil recovered. Everything bounced back. Now, was it perfect? Was it excellent? No, not necessarily, right? But it did recover. And that is because of the depth of roots, right? So there's that the soil is a sponge and it has that moisture available down deep into it. So the turf grass can continue to pull from that moisture reserve, right? That soil reservoir down there for a longer period of time and be able to stay stay active and then recover as soon as weather conditions arrive, right, and change. So when we're looking at potential drought conditions, stage 3, stage 4, if there is one, where watering is almost there is none. There is absolutely no option for outdoor watering. If we have planned up to that point, right, we have watered appropriately, we have managed our soil appropriately, and we have that deep rooting capacity, then we can feel pretty confident that our turf grass is going to be able to survive at least a 60-day period of time. Now, if we have mowing our grass very, very short, we're mowing it regularly, and we are watering like every other day, then we are going to have zero root structure, right? We're going to have zero rooting depth. And as soon as it gets hot enough out and dry enough, right, then that upper surface of the soil is also going to dry out, and those roots are going to dry out, and we're going to see death and decay of that turf grass. So keeping it watered appropriately is the key, and we'll talk about watering and getting that how we need to water to really get that depth of rooting. So here's a case in point from 2012 in College Station. It was a Tifway field out there in on campus in College Station. And August 2012, if any of you were around for 2011, right, you knew it was a pretty droughty year. 2012 was not a whole lot better. It was very hot, it was very dry. This is an unirrigated uh, little field here. And of course, it went brown, it went dormant. But then in November, as soon as weather conditions improved, rain started to come back into the forecast, then we started to see a fair amount of recovery and improvement in that in grass. So to be patient for one thing and to really prepare for what may or may not happen, right? So this is pretty much what we have in the majority of Texas. We have this heavy clay soil, this shrink swell, right? It causes, us to irrigate our foundations or, whatever. I mean, it causes a lot of different things. It is a problematic soil, but it's also a wonderful soil because of that water holding capacity that we have. Now, there are ways that we can improve clay soil, and one of those is using a product called expanded shale. So many of y'all may know about expanded shale. It is basically, if I understand it correctly, it is a byproduct like quarrying, where they take, they take the dust and everything from a quarry, and they put it together in a kiln. They fire it, and it creates these very porous little, basically little rocks, right? This aggregate, and studies show that when we use expanded shale in heavy clay, if it's incorporated into the top 4 to 6 inches of soil, right, then it opens up the soil and it improves water holding capacity and microbial activity because it relieves compaction, right? And it will stay. It will stay in place. Right? It's really damn. It's kind of. It's really so. Uh, Amazing. It used to be used very regularly on sports fields. Now sports fields really have these like very, very highly engineered soil structures and compounds and different things that they're using. A lot of it synthetic type stuff that is used underneath the actual turf grass itself. So expanded shale, one of those options that you can use if you're in a heavy clay situation and you want to improve that improve water holding capacity. So yeah, here's pretty much is what I did. This was coming up, but there you go. So it's pretty good stuff. Now compost, of course. All are master gardeners, so I'm gonna assume you already love compost. You already have a fond relationship with compost, and if you don't, then you probably should buddy up to it because it is great, right? It's great stuff. It does a lot. It is also a way to improve soil structure. You can improve a sandy soil. You can add water holding capacity by adding compost to a sandy soil. You can improve soil structure and improve water holding capacity by relieving compaction in a clay soil by using compost, right? So compost, you can actually you can till in if you want to do that, or you can actually use it as a top dressing, um, and work it down into the soil. There's lots of different ways you can do that, um, but it's a wonderful product that we really maybe don't use enough in some cases. We tend to use it a lot in gardens, vegetable gardening, but it really has great application for lawns, right? Especially when we're trying to improve soil structure to increase our water holding capacity. So you can definitely use it as a top dress um, with well, with any of these tools, right? You can use like a lawn rake to roll it in. You can use a shovel, but timing is important with it, and of course, growth is important, right? You don't want to smother the grass totally and not be able to uh, have your grass recover from this. So you really want to do it when the lawn is actively growing. So that is going to be towards the end of spring, early summer, after you've already mowed several times and you know that the grass is actively growing. And then at that point, it is okay to start using compost for a top dressing um, on there. Um, okay, so let's kind of get into this sort of burning question, which is like, how much water does my lawn really need, right? Now, many of y'all may have heard this 1 inch sort of theory, I guess we'll call it, where 1 inch per week is enough for your turf grass, and and there's some accountability to that, but what we have seen with water recommendation, uh, uh, here shortly is that it is very, very rare, if ever, that a watering recommendation exceeds uh, 3/4 of an inch. So we don't even get up to that 1 inch of water recommendation quite often. So 1 inch of water may be excessive for lawns, but really, like the classic answer is always it depends, right? It depends on a lot of circumstances. It depends on how you want your lawn to look, how much work you want to put into your lawn, right? Obviously, the more you water it, the more it's going to grow, the more you're going to have to mow it. It's dependent there's a lot of different factors in there. But so we can't really generalize it altogether, but that 1 inch sort of gets us to that generalization point. So luckily, though, we have science, right? Science is great. We love science. Evapotranspiration really is the key to telling us how much water our lawn actually needs. So I don't know if y'all have been exposed to evapotranspiration yet, if y'all have really talked about that. But a little quick thing on it is evapotranspiration is pretty much transpiration, which is moisture lost from the plant surface, right? So when a plant photosynthesizes, it's working, it's getting hot, it is opening its stomates, it is allowing moisture out to cool itself down, right? So transpiration is like plant sweat. When we work hard, we sweat to cool ourselves down. Plants do the same thing. Evaporation is moisture loss from the surface, right? So from rivers, streams, that type of stuff, water is evaporated out. So if we put those two things together, right, we get evapotranspiration, and it's kind of like a total amount of moisture lost. And then what do we need to actually replace in it? So how far can we go before we actually need to start replenishing those water needs into that plant, right? So big brains prevail on this, right? So we have calculations called the Penman-Monteith equation, which is the best. There are several other equations. The Penman-Monteith equation is what we use in Texas, seems to be the best fit for Texas, for our climate, and for our warm season turf grass, right? There are other ways to calculate evapotranspiration. This is the best for us, so this is the one that we typically gravitate to in Texas, right? So, what we need to calculate this, right, is we need several factors. We need a weather station that's going to give us wind, temperature, humidity, and solar radiation, right? So that is the one key that a lot of weather stations do not have is a device called a pyranometer, which measures the intensity of the sun, right? That's what solar radiation is. It's just sort of measuring that intensity of the sun. And that's a great impact on how much a plant is transpiring, as well as all these other things do too, right? So we know when it's moisture, and then of course if it's hot or if there's humidity in the air, then we're going to see quite as much evaporation, right? So all back into and that gives us a general idea of how much moisture is being lost from the plant, right? So then each plant deals with that moisture differently. So we have these things called coefficients, right? How much does the plant need to lose before we need to start replacing it, right? What is that point? What is that absolute wilting point of that plant? So that is 0.6 or like a 60% rate. So that is what we need to replace back into the plant. Cool season turfgrass, 80%. So a little bit higher, can't really stress it out too much. And then we can look at other plants like woody perennials and evergreens and trees and things like that. They're all going to have little different coefficients, and it's all going to depend a lot on their environmental growing conditions. But warm and cool season turfgrass are very, very consistent with this, and these are the numbers that we use very regularly. So looking at this, and we're going to get kind of sciencey, so some of y'all may glaze over here. So hopefully nobody actually falls asleep. But we'll catch a break here in just a little bit. So the Texas ET network, right, is available to everybody. It is a free source of weather type of data. It is run by Texas A&M School of Irrigation. Dr. Fitz and Charles Swanson there in the department run this program, have run it for years, and it is a great source of just historic weather information and current weather information. So what we need to do, right, is we can look at this information based on historic, what they call reference evapotranspiration, right? So if we look at the evapotranspiration in this chart for the Dallas-Fort Worth area, right, we can pretty much add all that up across, we've got our evapotranspiration, our crop coefficient, and we're getting to our estimate evapotranspiration, right? So if we add all that, calculate all that across, we get 55.85 inches of moisture that left the plant. Right, so our coefficient is 0.6, so we really only need to replace 60% of the plant to get it back to 100%. Right, so the survivability is great at 60%, so that brings our actual water down to 33 point, 33 and a half inches. Right, so then we can also stress the plant out a little bit more, right? So we don't need it to be perfect, so we can add a little more stress to it. So we're going to go ahead and cut it by another 60%. And I think in this presentation, I do have some pictures of how this all works out in the end. So now we've brought our actual need down to 20 inches of water per year. And then on top of that, we need to look at rainfall and some other stuff. So pretty interesting. You can calculate that yourself, or you can, if this program is available to you in your area, you can download this watermyyard.org program. This again is a product of Texas A&M. School of Irrigation. It is basically taking the information from the ET network and making it more user friendly for the end user, right? These are pictures of what the app looks like. You can do it on a desktop. This is a pay to play type of service. So if your water provider has bought into this service, then this data is available to you. So you may want to look at your list of counties or water providers that have this service on there. This is an old picture, so some of these in this group may have changed. Some of them, there may be some additions, there may be some that have dropped off. Who knows? But there's quite a few. There's quite a few out there. And basically, what this service does is this tells you on a weekly basis how much water do you really need to add back to your landscape, right? So it could be, and basically, so it's going to ask you several questions. What type of grass are you watering? What type of soil do you have? What type of sprinkler system do you have? Right. And it's going to take all that information, it's going to crunch it together, and it's going to give you a watering recommendation every week. So, the good look at like, how much water do I actually need? And this is a great way to actually do that. So now you're eliminating waste because you're not overwatering, or maybe you're underwatering, right? Your grass was struggling a little bit, so maybe you want to bump that water up a little bit. This gives you a very good guideline as to not to overwater, not to underwater, so you can create a nice, healthy landscape that's going to endure our crazy Texas weather swings and excuse me, and droughts and all that stuff. So this is a look at the Texas ET network, right? So remember, all of this data that is going into the watermyyard.org app is available on the Texas ET network, and it is free to use. You can set up your own profile, but what this is showing here really is just all of the years of data, the stations, weather stations that are all around the state of Texas, and just kind of a snapshot of some of the various counties where this is. This has been going on for a really, really long time. It's a very well thought out, very robust program. So with if you want to sign up for this, it's free. You just go to texaset.tamu.edu, and you click on your make a profile, right? And then it's going to ask you a couple of questions. What are you watering, right? You're going to say warm season turfgrass. What is your stress factor, right? So that's what we talked about, that 60% additional stress, right? You can go up or you can go down on that. Like it's going to depend on what type of quality grass you want, right? 60% is sort of the default. And then it's going to ask you what day you want your information or how you want your information. So, right. So, this particular one that I have here is for an address in Louisville. This was the closest station to my particular house in Grapevine, which is Louisville. And I'm getting the information delivered to me on Saturdays, right? So if we look at this, which was February 15th, this was the information that I got. My watering recommendation on here is 0 inches. I need to water my yard 0 for this week. So looking at the previous week, looking at the weather, what has happened in the previous week, right? So we have our evapotranspiration data there. We have our max temperature, minimum temperature, our relative humidity, our solar radiation, right? That pyranometer is a key into this. We have our rainfall data, right? Very, very important for watering, right? And then our wind speed. So if you look at this, we received for that week almost an inch of rainfall, right? So obviously, with over almost an inch of rainfall and the time of year, right? Temperatures are very low. We're not really growing. We're not really doing a lot of production on turf grass. There is no water required. Mother Nature provided for my lawn for that particular week. So I do not need to turn on my sprinkler system at all. And following along with this, you will be really surprised how many weeks that the recommendation is 0. It will be really, really amazing. And really, a lot of it is it's that rainfall. It's that rainfall piece. When do we get enough rainfall on our lawn to where we don't need to actually use any supplemental irrigation? So, talking about the 60% stress factor, right? And the 60% reduction, this was a study that was done looking at the stress factors, right? So, on the right, that is um, this is a St. Augustine grass. I do not know what variety is the St. Augustine grass that is grown in these little PVC pipe and toilet flange containers. Very creative. So at 100% replacement, we're replacing 100% of the water that is lost through uh, evapotranspiration in the plant. It's very, very green, right at 100% replacement. If we stress it out a little bit and we're only replacing 80%, right, we're starting to see just the slightest bit stress, right? See, 60%, we're seeing a little bit more stress. We're seeing very right? It's strong, it's growing good, it's very acceptable to me in this, especially during a summer when it's really, really hot. 40%, we're starting to see a little more bound come in, a little more stress. And then even at the 20% is pretty low, long life. So we are seeing the majority of it is browning or going into dormancy at that 20% replacement. So you can see why the 60% is really kind of that happy medium, right? We're saving some water. We're giving the plant enough to where we're still creating a nice, healthy landscape, but we're not overwatering, we're not overdoing it. So it is kind of the perfect place. So a seasonal adjustment for watering for turf grass should look something like this. Now, of course, this is for North Texas, so it could vary a little bit, but um, as we saw earlier, right, that bell curve of the growth of warm season turfgrass also follows the seasonal adjustment. So we're not going to need much water at all in our winter, spring, and fall seasons, right? So really, our growing season doesn't really start to kick in until March or April, right? And then we're not really fully watering as much as we need to until July and August. And then we're going to start dropping off again September, October, November, and December. So really, like for the Dallas Fort Worth area, I generally tell folks that really don't need to turn on our sprinkler systems probably until the end of March, beginning of April, depending on what our weather is doing. And we should be turning off our automatic irrigation systems in October, right? And then it should just be manual mode as needed from that point on. And generally, we receive enough rainfall to where we don't need to manually irrigate. Now, South Texas, going to be a little bit different, right? So you may really be seeing full on watering happening towards the end of May or maybe beginning of June and extending more into October. So things vary, but there is the seasonal adjustment that is important to follow because we don't really, the turf grass doesn't need the same amount of water all year round, right? Because it's when the temperature drops and the days get shorter, there's no production, right? There's no photosynthesis, so it's not really growing. So the amount of water that it needs is very, very minimal. We looking at how much water does our lawn really need? We have the um, the information from the ET network. We have all of this stuff, but how does that really equate to how long do I run my irrigation system, right? So if you have an automatic irrigation system and somebody tells you to put an inch of water out on your irrigation, you would have no idea how long to run it to actually get that inch of water, right? So there's a few ways to do that. The best to do that is to do like a catch can test. So a fun little project for y'all to do if you want is like a home catch can test. This is pretty quick type of test. There are audits, right, which require a lot more in-depth work, where you're like, you have more catch cans and you're dropping the low quarter and blah, 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 all that stuff. But we just need to get the basics, right? We need the basic information. So we're going to gather up our tuna cans, cat food cans, anything that is low with a flat side, right? We don't want to use coffee cups or anything that have like a funnel type shape or whatever. We want to use something that is low and flat. So we're going to put these out in our yard, right? Like this diagram here, you can see the blues are the sprinkler heads. The oranges are the catch cans that we're putting out. And we're going to put these out in the yard and we're going to run it for a certain period of time. We're going to measure that time, right? We're going to keep track of that time that we're running it. And then we're going to come back and we're going to measure the amount of water in each of these cans. Right. So the reason we're using a flat side is because now we can just drop a ruler down in there and we can get a measurement, right? If we're using some type of funnel, then of course there's calculations for, the opening versus the bottom and all that type of stuff. So this makes the math really, really easy. So anytime you give math easy, I am in for that. So not my best subject in school. So now we're going to measure all these cans, and then we're gonna average all that water up, and we're going to come up with a precipitation rate. So we're going to know how much water that particular station put out over a certain period of time. Okay, so here's an example, and I just made all this up, right? So do not do not take this any of this to heart. So okay, so I have 12 catch cans that I put out in on my irrigation zone, right? And then these were the amounts that I measured in these cans, right? And this is like having variation is not unnormal at all. Is not uncommon to have all these variations, right? So I added them all up and then I averaged it and I had less than half of an inch, 0.41 inches of water in all of those cans when I ran it for 15 minutes. I should have that on this chart, but that's what I did. I ran this for 15 minutes. This is how much water was collected in each of those cups over that 15-minute period of time. So now I want to calculate my precipitation rate. Okay. I want to get that to what does that mean in minutes or inches? Got to get this converted down to where I can make the change on my irrigation controller. How can I tell my irrigation controller how much water I need? So we're going to do this precipitation rate calculation. So we're going to take our average catch can rate and we're going to divide it by our test run time in minutes, right? Which is 15 minutes, right? So here's our calculation, right? 0.41 over 15. And then we're going to multiply it by 60 because we want to get it to an hour, right? We want to do inches per hour because we're going to break it down to minutes again here shortly. All right. So for 1 hour, if I were to run my system for 1 hour or this zone, right? Because this really needs to be done for each individual zone. If I was going to run this for 1 hour, get 1.64 inches of water. Okay? So if we go back and think about our watering recommendation, if our recommendation is for half of an inch of water for the week, right? And we run our system for an hour, we're way over watering, right? So we're getting down to where we can actually apply that science to our actual lawns, right? So keep this in mind, right? We have a precipitation rate for this zone of 1.64 inches per hour. Now, how do we make that apply to our irrigation controller, right? So now we're going to do a runtime calculation. So our irrigation amount, right, which is how much do we want to water? Okay, so I'm going to go with this 1 inch arbitrary thing, right? So this is our watering recommendation. So 1 inch is what our irrigation amount is, and our precipitation rate from our last thing, from our last slide, is 1.64 inches, right? So we're going to divide that. We're going to multiply by 60 again to get it down to minutes. To get 1 inch of water out of that zone that we measured, it's going to take 36 minutes, right? Almost 37 minutes to get 1 inch of water, right? So if our recommendation is half of an inch of water, then really our runtime is like around 17 minutes for this, right? So does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. It's not really easy to explain and it's not really easy to do, but these are like calculations you can play with, you can do things with, you can test it out. But this is how we kind of break it down and get and actually be able to use that information that's being provided to us in a little bit simpler of a way. So, and I think it is now break time again. So, yes, thankfully, let's take another break. Let's take another 10-minute break. And that will get us back here at 11:40. Okay, does that sound good, everybody? Let's get back at 11:40 and we'll finish up.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dean.
All right, thank you. All right, are we ready to get back going? Let's get going here. Let's get this closed out for the day. And I don't want to keep you guys too far past your time. We are running a little bit long, a little long-winded today, I guess, just chatting. So, all right, so let's sort of bring all this around to how can we be effective and efficient on our watering, right? So we to sort of recap, we have the problem, right, which is um, water demand, right, is being stressed. So we need to be efficient with our outdoor water use because that is the first thing that's going to be actually cut when we get into drought restrictions. We have the science and the data and the information to show that our landscapes can survive droughts, even our lawns, if watered and managed appropriately. So we've got a whole education component on how to actually manage our lawns better. So now let's just get into sort of the effective and efficient watering aspects of that. And soil is a big part of it, right? We've talked about soil a number of times now. We've talked about clay soils, sandy soils, loamy soils, right? We've talked about how important this is, but it doesn't always get through when it comes to our landscaping. Um, we don't really always think about this all the time. Is this and how actually important it is? This is the clay, the triangle, right, which kind of tells you where all of these clays exist. And of course, indexes really clay is kind of rules the roost for us, right? So good thing about clay, right, has a high water holding capacity, whereas clay has very low water capacity, right? So water moves through sand very quickly, yet it's hard to get water into clay for it to hold there longer. So they both kind of have their pluses and their minuses, right? No perfect world on those, but when we talk about irrigation, lawn irrigation or landscape irrigation, right, we really have to consider our infiltration rate for our soil that whatever we're watering on is on, right? So the infiltration rate is how quickly can the soil absorb the water. This is super general. Right, we can see that in inches per hour terms, sands uh, absorb water pretty quickly, right? Pretty fast. Whereas clay, very slow, right? So on a good day, right, a quarter of an inch of water per hour will be absorbed by clay soil. So it's very slow, right? We've all seen that fill a hole up with water, and wait for it to drain out, right? So it's very slow infiltration rate. Now with sprinklers, though, right? Our typical type of sprinklers that are used, right? The application rate exceeds that of the infiltration rate of our soil. Fixed spray heads is what we see most commonly used in landscape applications. This is just like that kind of cone-shaped spray that's fixed in one position. They apply 1.5 to 2 inches of water per hour, right? So if we're thinking about a clay soil, right, and we're trying to water plant material with spray heads on that clay soil, right, our infiltration rate is very, very low, but our application rate is very, very high. So what's going to happen? We're going to get runoff. We're going to get waste. Okay, so here I'll put those two charts together side by side for you so you can really kind of see. You can see the clay soil and you see that infiltration rate right there of 0.04 to zero point 0.2 inches per hour, and then our application rate up here of 1.5 to 2 inches per hour. So excessive runoff can be found, and really that is the same for all of these, right? So even look at the sand, the infiltration rate does not match this. But we can do better by changing how we are actually watering, right? So what we're using, rotary nozzles are kind of a new kid on the block for irrigation, and they have a much lower application rate, much more in line with our typical soil. So we can switch to something like that and actually reduce our water waste and avoid scenes like this. So these sprinkler heads running right here, those are rotary nozzles right there. So, but this is not what we want, right? We don't want to see this type of stuff. What we want is we want to water deeply and infrequently. Okay, so we want to push the water down deep into the soil. That's what we've been talking about. So we want to do it not as often, and we want to do it deep. So to do that, we need to use what's called a cycle and soak methodology, right? So we need to put water on, let it soak down into the soil, right? Because our infiltration rate is pretty slow. So we want to let it soak down into the soil and then put more water on, right? So if our total runtime is 30 minutes for our sprinkler system, we may want to break that up into two 15-minute runtimes with like 30 minutes or an hour in between, or three 10-minute runtimes with 30 minutes in between each one, right? So we want to give that time for that application of water to soak down into the soil so we can push it down deep to get those roots down deeper into the ground, right? So the deeper the roots, the better off we're going to be for our drought avoidance, and the less often we're going to have to water, right? So we're going to be able to save water and increase our health of our plants, right? So, and we don't want to do this in the morning, right? We don't want water at night. Right, we don't want the water sitting on the leaf surface overnight for long periods of time. That is going to promote disease, and it's just going to eventually evaporate off, right? The plant does not, especially grass, does not take water up through the leaf surface. It takes it up through the roots. So we want to get the water to the soil, to go down into the soil, to be picked up by the roots to grow the plant. So we certainly don't want to water at night. We want to water early in the morning and then let the day evaporate the water off of the plant surface itself. So a lot of places do have prohibitions on watering in the afternoon. So most of the communities that have this type of thing, it's usually between the hours of 10 a.m. and 6 or 7 p.m., right? There's no watering during those times. That's when the winds pick up, the sun picks up, the temperature starts picking up. So we're going to start seeing a lot more evaporative losses during that time period. Luckily, we do have tons of new technology there. So we've got our old standard controllers. We do have new fancy controllers, smart controllers. There are a bunch of them on the market, and they all have various qualities about them, right? So a lot of times with a lot of the new controllers have that built in already to them. You would just select that feature and it will go ahead and calculate your cycle and soak for you. A lot of the smart controllers, try to mimic what is happening with the watering recommendations. They will ask a number of questions of what you're watering, and then they will pick up information from a nearby weather station and try to water your lawn based on whatever the criteria is, be it soil moisture sensor or evapotranspiration, that type of stuff. What we have seen though, they are always the best, right, at doing it. So these are 3 different studies. The first one is 6 years of smart controller performance in Texas. This is Charles Swanson and Dr. Guy Phipps again from the School of Irrigation at Texas A&M University. And they found that most of the smart controllers overwatered based on evapotranspiration data, right? So, and that's what we were using for our watering recommendations, right? Michael Dukes out of University of Florida testing, he also found that smart irrigation controllers only reduce water use when excessive watering is already in place. So he's not seeing a lot of savings from just implementing a smart controller in his studies. And then, of course, Shane Evans, again, more studies on this. He found that extension service recommendations, right, which is basically evapotranspiration data, what we're proposing in watering recommendations, is more efficient than smart controllers. So don't think that a smart controller is an ultimate fix. It is a great tool, but it may not be the ultimate fix on all of it. Another study showed like a preference for features based on homeowners and really found that automatic failure detection was what was most important. So they really wanted to know when there was a problem, right? When did my sprinkler system overwater? When did it underwater? When did it come on? When did it not come on? Right? That type of stuff. So over like a soil moisture sensor or weather-based evapotranspiration controls. Some of this is very different. This was also determined that people who had a confidence in their landscaping abilities, they had higher knowledge of that, were less likely to adopt any type of new technology. They felt like they had it under control, right? People that were more water conservation oriented, right, were going to prefer whatever features were available that were going to give them the savings. So very interesting on all of this, but like a smart controller is a great tool. It is not the ultimate answer to all of this, right? So we want to be sure that we're doing what we need to do to also be involved, right? The human aspect is the most critical piece. The human behavior is the most critical piece in the water conservation picture and the landscape picture. Soil moisture sensors are an emerging technology in residential landscaping, been used for ages in farming and sports fields, but a little more complicated in a residential setting where we have lots of microclimates and various things where you might get some overwatering or underwatering based on the position of a soil moisture sensor. Rain and freeze sensors, you have rain and freeze sensors. That is it. That is like a very inexpensive, easy add-on device that will save you a lot of water from watering in the rain or from watering when temperatures drop. Like we have here now, we get these swings where it may be 60 degrees during the day, but then it's going to drop to like 20 degrees overnight. So we want to be really conscious of that and have our irrigation systems turned off. But if we forget, we make a mistake, whatever. I mean, we are human, right? So we want to have some other type of device to help fail safe, that type of stuff. And pressure regulation is another thing now. There are rules in place in the state of Texas that govern the way irrigation systems should be installed, right? Those rules and regulations are not always followed, they're not always enforced. It is a very, very touchy and difficult subject, but these rules are in place and are designed to have irrigation systems built to be efficient, and pressure regulation is a big part of that, right? If we're overpressured, then beyond what the operating specs are for the irrigation system, we're blowing water apart, we're creating a mist, a fog, we are evaporating a lot of that water. If we are properly pressured, then we are creating bigger droplets. The water is actually falling onto the plant material and the soil where we actually want to water, right? So it has become a law, right? That all irrigation systems have these pressure regulating devices in them in a number of states. It has been discussed locally in Texas. There is a group called the Water Conservation Advisory Council and the Irrigation um, Advisory Council as well, and it has been discussed um, as to the efficacy of requiring something like this at the legislative session. So we would just have to wait and see. But it does work. Here's a study out of Oklahoma State University where they replaced 157 sprinkler heads that were all overpressured, right? They replaced them with appropriately pressured regulating heads, right? And saw a savings of 16,740 gallons of water per month, right? So that's how much water we're wasting over pressurizing a system. And most of that is going to be runoff and just waste into the atmosphere. And this is a chart that really is kind of a multiplier that shows you how many inches of water is actually lost per increase in PSI in a system. This is what a high pressure, overpressure parade looks like. This is what it should look like. This is where it should be. So irrigation design is, of course, absolutely critical for our landscapes, our design, everything else. So we want to be sure that we're being efficient and we're not mixing things up, right? This is a case here where we have a rotary nozzle and a spray nozzle, right? And if you go way back to, well, not way back, you go back to those charts of application rate, you know that there's a huge difference in application rate between these two. So we're going to have to overwater maybe to meet demand on this one end, or we're going to see stress in those areas. It's just not a good situation, right? Head-to-head coverage is what we want with a sprinkler system, right? You want one head to spray to the other head and the other head to spray back to the other head, right? So we often see an attempt to save money by spacing heads out farther apart, right? Like a 10-foot spray head might be put on 12-foot spacing, right? So they can have fewer heads, less pipe, right? And save money. It's kind of a low budget cut. It doesn't really do very good. So, and then of course, hydrozoning is something else that we want to take into consideration. We want to be sure we're grouping like materials with like water needs, right? So sun and water needs together. Right, here's just a little chart, right? We've got our high water use lawn areas, and then we have our moderate water use, maybe landscape or garden area. And then we've got our low water use, like native butterfly garden beds or whatever in those spaces, right? So we want to make sure that we're not mixing those things because we're going to overwater something to underwater or underwater something else, right? We want to be able to be efficient, give the plants the water that they need in their little areas, and not mix those things. So we'll go through some good and bad examples, and then I think we're pretty much at the end of our presentation. We might go a couple of minutes over here. So this picture, this is a good hydrozone type of system. This will give you an idea of what we're talking about, right? So you can see that these sprays are isolated to this plant bed by the porch, right? There are no heads popped up in the grass, watering the grass. This is good because you can water this bed however you need to water it. If you want to convert these spray heads to drip, you can do that, and you're not going to affect the water on the turf grass. You may water this plant bed once a week. You may end up watering the turf grass twice a week, right? So we want to separate those two all together, right? So good hydrozoning right there. Again, good hydrozoning, again, with the multi-stream rotary nozzles, right? This bed right here is like a native, like ornamental grass bed. And then this is obviously a turf grass bed. So if we are trying to water this ornamental turf grass bed, the same amount of water that we're watering the lawn grass is, we're going to see probably some roots maybe rotting out on that ornamental grass. And we're also going to see weeds popping up through the mold in that bed because we are unnecessarily watering that area much, right? So again, a good example of how hydrozoning should be laid out. So a not so good example, these risers. We've all seen this. These risers are up over these boxwoods, spraying over the sunshine, ligustrum down there, and onto a turf grass area. So the idea here, I'm assuming, is to get the water to reach the turf grass because it was being blocked by the shrubs. The shrubs have grown up. What are we really doing here? We're really just blowing water into the atmosphere. Very little of that water is actually going to make it to the turf grass. Plus, this hedge is pretty lined up, right? So somebody is trimming this more than likely with some type of hedge trimmer. So a lot of those leaves are probably cut open. So whenever they water, the moisture can sit on those leaves, and those cut leaves are an open avenue for pathogens to get into that plant and create disease at some point in time. So best bet here, drop those risers down to shrub bubblers just for the shrubs, and maybe do addison to meet the turf grass requirement. So separate those two things. Another situation here, not so good. We have these large rotors spraying this lawn. For some reason, a plant bed was put in the corner, but the spray head or the rotor head was not moved, right? So if this plant here were to grow up, it's going to block water, right, from reaching the grass and any of the other plants in that plant bed, right? So really, what should have happened here is this rotor nozzle should have been moved out of this bed over here, and then an adozone put in to water this, or this should just be a dry landscape bed. Maybe some set of these annuals that are in here, maybe some nice woody perennials, and then this spray head back here, this rotor sprays obviously onto this bed, let it actually cover the moisture needs for that particular bed. And the last thing is really practical turf grass areas, right? We've talked a lot about turf grass. We know it's heavy water use on the turf grass. So we want to be practical. This basically is a very large yard with a slope on it. So he's kind of created a little bit of a rain garden here, got rid of the high use grass areas, reduced his mowing area, his watering area, and his fertilizing area to now a very manageable area, but he's still getting the ecosystem services of the turf grass, right, which is cooling, sun abatement, and all that stuff that you don't necessarily get from these plants up by the house. So he's still getting those ecosystem services from the grass, but he just doesn't have as much to maintain, right? So, yeah, being a car guy, there's a Toyota FJ62 back there. So, just want to point that out. Be a pretty cool car. Okay. All right. So this is some pictures I took at a hotel that I stayed at recently. This is very impractical turf grass areas. You can see this gentleman is actually cutting the grass with a string trimmer. That's not good for the grass at all in any way, shape, or form. Why even have the grass in these odd, weird shapes, right? Watering it is a mess, and just maintaining it is time consuming. It should just be a plant bed altogether. There is really no need for turf grass in that area. Another example of that, what should just be a plant bed. We do not need turf grass in this weird little corner by a driveway and by a sidewalk. You can see it's growing over the rocks. Nobody's using that bench for anything. So again, this should probably just be a nice little mulched bed with some nice drought tolerant native plants in that little bed there. Okay, so here's the situation. Wall-to-wall turf grass, all the way across here, across this whole entire yard, right? So they want to screen from their neighbors, so they put in these trees and these shrubs, right? So, but here's the thing, right, is they just took up the grass around each of these plants. So now they're going to be watering and trying to mow behind all of these shrubs on this fence line. So that's a lot of like pushing and pulling of the mower, trying to squeeze behind here. And then as these grow up, there's going to be a lot of blocking of the irrigation system. So probably a better choice would have been just to make this whole thing a nice big plant bed all along the fence and isolate your turf grass area. Again, these are pictures I took at a recent visit to the island of Nantucket. If anybody likes that sort of stuff and is into uh, New England history and stuff, then I say definitely go. If you like hydrangeas, it is the place to be in the summer for sure. But they had these little strips of turf grass everywhere along these sidewalks, like these little strips of grass. So that just seems like a lot of unnecessary maintenance, right? To do that. Very confused as to why this was. Some of them were better groomed than others. Like you can obviously see this is very groomed here, but it's not quite as groomed on this side. So again, probably just plants along here would be better, and maybe even plants here, and just forget turf grass altogether in that area. This little picture here. Um, is this little turf grass area necessary here? Maybe if you have a little dog or something. But if this is just a sitting area where you go and you sit and you relax, maybe maybe the trouble to manage this turf grass is not necessary, right? I'm not an advocate of artificial turf, but this might be an opportunity for some artificial turf to be put down in that backyard. Again, another very large, like corner type lot. Looks like there is a sidewalk maybe that crosses over here, across here. So why have this area in the foreground in turf grass that has to be managed? Might as well just go ahead and landscape that with some nice native woody type perennial plants and the decomposed granite. And it looks really nice, and no need to really overmanage that area. Another house, this could be Houston, could be Florida, could be Alabama, who knows? Very nice looking magnolia tree there, and somebody's spending an enormous amount of time trimming up these little spirally bushes. But right, they've cut off like these difficult corner areas to use, and they've landscaped these areas. They've brought this out away from the house and landscaped these areas, minimizing the amount of turf grass that they have to manage. So keeping it a lot of color, a lot of texture, a lot more than just having one like extensive turf grass area. And if you're really into that monoculture thing on your turf grass, they're easier to do it on a small scale than on a large scale. Again, another picture of what I would consider smart design, right? We've eliminated the hell strip in the front that goes between the curb and the sidewalk. That is always a huge pain to maintain, right? I mean, definitely not easy, but they've done a lot of native plants here, a lot of flowering plants. Looks very nice. Probably a lot of wildlife activity there, and they have just this small little strip of grass here to maintain filtration for runoff when it rains, and also just maintaining those ecosystem services that turf grass naturally does apply, give us. So that's it for me. Here are some resources on managing turf grass. Mostly, almost all of these are under the Aggie Turf website. So you can go there. You can find out a lot more information on all of this type of stuff. And that's my contact info. If you really need to get a hold of me, you can certainly reach out to me and I will help answer any questions. And with that, that's it. I'm done. We have made it. We have closed out just a little bit over time for you guys. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you right now. I see a couple of things popping up into the chat. Oh, that's a thank you. Well, you're absolutely welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending your morning with me. And I hope you guys got some good information out of this presentation.
Dean, thank you so very much. We're so excited that you were able to present this information to us. I'm going to kind of hang out for just a few minutes to see if there is any questions. We want to make sure we get those answered while we have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any questions for Dean or for me about the program? We will meet again next week, same time, same place. And so you can ask me another question, but let's make sure that everyone is getting their questions answered.
Do you have next week?
Oh, that is a good question. Let me look that up right quick.
Okay, so here's a question from Dennis about monitoring aquifer recharge or levels. Yes. So the Texas Water Development Board does monitor that. That Water for Texas site does have groundwater on it. And then also the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality also has a resource for monitoring aquifer levels. A lot of times, also, depending on where you are, there is a groundwater district available. Some of them are more active than others, but you can search on the Water Development Board or Water for Texas site, and it will give you all of the groundwater control districts that are in your area. And if you have one, you can generally go to their website or call them and they can give you information on aquifer levels and recharge rates. So there's plenty of information on that. Even though it is a right to capture, it's not really monitored or regulated like surface water is. They do track it pretty regularly. So.
So next week we have plant pathology with Dr. Kimberly Cochran. So that's next.
Okay, great. Yeah, more sciencey stuff. Like really, that's deep science right there. Big sense.
It can be, at least. She does a great job at presenting it to where it's digestible and easy to understand. So, which we're so thankful for all of our speakers teaching in that way. It's not, it's definitely manageable. So
yes.
Well, folks, I don't see any other questions. You do have Dean's contact information. And so I guess we'll go ahead and sign off, and we look forward to seeing you back next week. Dean, thank you so very much for spending your morning with us. We thank you as always. You do an excellent job. And with that said, have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. Bye now.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.